Welcome back to Season 2, Episode 2 of the TBS Business Sales Podcast, Episode 3. Thank you very much, Damien. Today we're going to talk about common mistakes that sellers or people thinking of selling make. Now, we could wax lyrical for hours about this with respect, couldn't we? Because we've certainly learned a thing or two.
But we're not going to.
No, we're just going to condense it, keep this hopefully within 15 minutes to hold your attention, but also so that you can learn quite a lot about what not to do. Now, the first one I have is around timing. We see this often, and this year's actually got some great examples, but there never is a perfect time to sell your business. So we're not trying to force you to come to us and sell your business tomorrow, but we're saying you really need to be open to strike when the iron is hot. We know of business owners that were going to sell pre-GFC and chose not to because they were making a lot of money. The GFC hit, they obviously couldn't sell. They then started clawing back, and then the earthquakes hit, being here in Christchurch. They then held on, and then they made a lot of money in, say, 2015, 16, especially if they're linked to construction. So they held on. Probably should have sold then, and then we had pandemics, and now we're in a recession. And they're still holding on. So at the moment, business owners haven't had a very good year. Most, not all. March 2025 financial year, we've unfortunately seen some pretty poor performance, and that's across all industries. So if you're in that boat, don't feel alone. It's very, very common. And what that means is that the business could be quite tough to sell at the moment if we are going to value it based on obviously the last financial year and current year trading. I've dealt with a couple of businesses recently, and one is an example. I appraised it about 2 years ago, and I said your business is probably worth 900 to 950,000. It sort of imports a leisure product and sells it. It was doing really well. The vendor said, that's great. I really would love to crack 7 figures, so I think I'll hold on. He sent me through the numbers 2 weeks ago, and it barely even paid him a wage for the March 2025 financial year. I said, oh, it's unfortunate. How was Q1 2026? And he said it was worse than the same period last year, which means it's probably not going to make any money this year. So his business is probably not even worth, unfortunately, his stock and plant, which is around 300 grand. Now, that's at the moment. Things will inevitably pick up, we hope.
So he could be there for another 18 months or 2
The
years.
reality is he is going to be there for a couple of years. And there's no crystal ball, but perhaps 2 years ago, it might have been an ideal time for him to go to market. But he's happy to hold on. But just remember that there never will be a perfect time to sell. If the time is right to you, and if you think you're going to get a reasonable value for your business, the business is trading well, potentially it's a really good time to go to market.
Thank you, Sam. The second mistake is taking your foot off the gas once you've chosen a broker and you've taken and you've listed your business for sale. Please don't think that that's all you've got to do when you can just kind of cruise and be away from the business a bit and not drive it as you have in the past. If anything, once you're on the market, it's even more important to be really focused on driving that business forward. As Sam has just alluded to, recent and current trading is probably the most critical indicator for a buyer at the time they're considering purchasing your business. They're pushing out a chunk of money, whether it's hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, and if it looks like the business is starting to tank or worse, that is just the wrong time. So don't take your foot off the gas once you've decided to list the business. Keep things rolling. Keep investing in the business. Keep doing what you do, because at the end of the day, it may not sell. 2 out of 10 that we deal with don't sell. So you might be owning it in a year or 2 years' time. So you don't want to just assume that, hey, it's all care, no responsibility for the next 6 months. Keep your foot on the gas and keep it rolling.
Last month's trading is more important than last year's trading, and never forget that. It's current, especially if your bank's looking at it, the buyers, accountants are looking at it. Dream result for us, if we've got a business that's gone to market and then we get to the end of the month and they've had a record month, it makes our job so much easier, because we've now got buyers going, oh, wow, this is actually going to do better than what we've marketed the business at. So yeah, keep that foot on the throttle the whole time.
The next mistake, relying on, I guess, unrealistic valuations. And that might be from inexperienced brokers, or it might be from, a professional advisor who's not really familiar with the market, or they don't have comparative market data. Or it could be just a broker trying to buy the listing. They don't have much to sell, so they're saying, hey, well, I'll just kind of, I'll push the value a little bit and try and land this vendor as my client. And then if I have to talk them down during the sale process, well, I'll be able to do that. Now, it's not something that we adhere to here at Tobacco, but I can think of three very, very clear examples where in two of them, another brokerage has put forward a value which is crazy. And in one case, even the vendor didn't believe, but he went with them because he said, well, you're the experts. And subsequent to that, they came back to me and they said, look, we've been trying to sell at X. I've looked at the business and I said, look, you're probably only worth half X or a third of X because things changed. The market changed, your trading changed. And so they lost time and they lost credibility, and their businesses appeared on the market as tired businesses. So that can be really dangerous. And the third example was actually a business that I sold to to a couple. They've done really, really well in 3 or 4 or 5 years that they've owned it, and they've had a particularly good year just finished in the March 25 year. And so they had a brokerage value the business at a value that, it was fully valued at a strong multiple that perhaps could have been justified if the business had had 3 or 4 years of trading at that level. In my view, it was probably 30% overvalued. Because we only get paid if we sell a business, we're not going to put our hands up and say, oh yeah, well look, we can achieve that value for you. So this particular individual has chosen to run with the broker with the high valuation, and that's fine. It would be lovely if they get the value that they're expecting to get, but I would have a strong suspicion that they won't. Ultimately, if the value sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
And unfortunately, we've seen this has happened many times over the years, and we've actually seen these businesses go to market with the other broker. We see it go to market at that price where we thought it was perhaps overvalued, and we've seen it sit there. Now, we just talked about taking your foot off the throttle. Worst case scenario is that the business, say we think the business is worth $1 million, they've gone out at 1.2, and they think they're going to get 1.2. They then sit back, relax, take their foot off the throttle. It's actually going to be a double disaster because A, you're not going to get that 1.2, but if you've taken your foot off the throttle and sales start dropping, for example, month by month, you're not even going to get that mil. So unfortunately, we have seen businesses then sell for under that mil 8 months later, a year later. So you've really got to get that price. You've got to nail that price and be honest, be realistic, about what you're going to achieve.
Sam, the fourth mistake that really is resonating with me at the moment, because I just had a client who's had to come off the market as a result, not keeping your broker up to date with either good or bad news. Good news is great. Strong forward orders is brilliant. I've just listed a business. It's a substantial trades business. They've got 750 grand's worth of forward orders, which is 3 or 4 months worth of turnover, which is just absolutely brilliant, particularly in this environment. And the business is cranking. So it's great to have that because, again, we can engage with buyers really strongly by showing the good stuff. But I've also had businesses where there's been some bad news. I had one just recently where they were advised after we went to market, but not long after, they were advised of a commercial dispute that it involved that was a trades business, involved some of the work that had been done, and with one of what had been one of their major clients, probably only 10% of sales, but still a reasonably chunky client. Now, we got to a point once I was advised about this particular dispute. It's unfortunate because we really can't continue to promote the business. And there's 2 reasons behind that. Look, the core business is still very sound. Don't get me wrong. It's a great wee business. But ultimately, that particular client is probably not going to engage with them again. So there's potentially 10% of your sales that are gone, which will be seen as somewhat risky by a buyer. But the other one is, if this commercial dispute cannot be resolved amicably and behind the scenes, if it gets to court and suddenly it becomes more common knowledge, there's the brand credibility
100%,
around the business. And so someone coming in, clearly they need to be advised about this particular dispute. And if they think, crikey, this brand could be tarnished in another 6 to 12 months by the time things roll through courts, if it can't be resolved, then that's certainly going to affect their view of value. If they proceed at all, it will be at a reduced value because there's a higher risk. And Sam, you've got an example as well.
Yeah, I have a business at the moment. We went to market in March this year. Marketed as trades business, marketed as semi-managed. Whether it was a sort of a foreman and an ops manager. And so my organizational structure was correct at the time. We always get confirmation from our vendors that they're happy with all the content. That's very important. We get that in writing from our vendors, really to cover us as well, but it's good to get them to check. What happened 2 months later is that one of the key managers, or what we thought was key at the time, that person actually left the business. I wasn't made aware. So the IM, otherwise I would have actually updated the IM and I would have advised all parties that had inquired in the business, which is what we need to do, being fully transparent. The business is now under contract. There's been an offer. We've got some great buyers. Now it's been uncovered that that person is not with the business, and I didn't know, and the buyers didn't know. So we've established that. We've worked through it. It actually has turned out that that person wasn't really needed. April to July trading, they've already made over half of a year's profit within that period. So the business is cranking along. So it's actually turned out okay. However, if it hadn't, if that person was really key and they were the driver of the business and I wasn't aware of it, the buyers weren't aware of it, we get it under due diligence, it could have caused a huge issue. So it's just about vendors going, okay, hey, Sam or Damien, this has just happened. Just want to let you know, this is the potential impacts of the business, or this is how I plan to resolve any situation. Then we go to all of our buyers and go, hey, we're being transparent. This has happened. This is what we think the ramifications are, if any. And then we're just being open and honest, and we work through with our buyers around that.
Exactly. And most buyers are fully understanding because they know business is business.
This is exactly right.
It's an ongoing thing.
Happen in business, yeah.
Sam, I've just got two more. The first one, I think it's number 5 within this topic, is in mistakes. When you're an owner, look, when a brokerage first takes a business to market, there's going to be a bit of a sugar rush. There's going to be a bunch of buyers that respond because if it's unidentified, which most sales are, they will look at the headlines of the flyer and the information and say, hey, yeah, look, that could be of interest to me. So as brokers, we get a sugar rush of initial interest. We engage with those potential buyers, and pretty soon, and literally within a week to 10 days from that initial rush, we're probably down to about 5 to 10% of the people that first inquired, if that have continued interest. So I think one of the mistakes that a vendor can perhaps occasionally make is they'll look at that sugar rush and say, hey, everyone wants my business, so I'm going to hold out for the top dollar. The reality is, mostly the initial interest is the best interest. Your business is fresh. It's on the market for the first time. It's not always the best, but our counsel to vendors is, look, we've had some really good response. It's narrowed down to only one potential offer. The offer's within 10%. We might be able to edge that up a little bit more. But I think, that's about it. Now, that might be within the first 3 weeks of being on the market. That is a result, So I guess our counsel to vendors is, don't be absolutely, fixated on either a number or think that initial energy in the sale process will continue from the market, because it won't. It will just die away. And then suddenly, even when we relaunch, there'll be a wee peak again, but then it'll die away. So, there is a cycle to these things, and we've seen this cycle. I've seen this cycle for over 20 years.
Bird in the hand, as we wouldn't do in the bush. And an example is a business I put out 2 weeks ago. We had, within the first 48 hours, we had 15 inquiries. Those inquiries were from our database only. So they're buyers that we know, and they're generally, most of them are vested and we know are really keen. So it's not from putting it on Trade Me or websites. It's straight from our database. More often than not, our buyers who actually do purchase will be from that database. Of those inquiries, we've actually got 2 meetings this week, 2 weeks on, which is really great, and it's likely that we'll get 1 or 2 offers from them now. I think they'll be very good offers, and they'll be very, very close to asking price, if not at asking price. But that's Damien's dead right. If the vendor was then to go, oh, actually, there was so much inquiry, there was 15, so let's just hold out for the other guys. But I've spoken to the other guys, of course. Some are just still looking into things, which usually means they're just tire kicking. Some don't respond. Others have said it's not for us, and they get these full reports. So when you have a buyer that's really keen and wants to come and meet you, you've really got to do everything you can do to get a deal with that buyer. Because hey, that means this business could be sold come November. If we don't make a deal with these guys, it could sit there. Quite likely it may not be till 2026 calendar year that our business actually sells. So they've got a whole nother summer to get through, which, if you want out,
And as we said in the previous podcast, often one business sale in one buyer. There is often just the right buyer out there. And look, the final point in this particular episode, if you're the owner and the vendor, please don't be the bottleneck. One of the challenges that we do have from time to time, particularly where it's a slightly larger, more expensive business, if the owner is the MD or the general manager of the business, and everything or a lot of the gnarly stuff goes through them, it just makes it harder for a buyer to come on board and say, hey, I don't quite have the experience to do that. And they're going to need to keep hold of the owner for maybe 3 to 6 months, either as part of the vendor support or on a retainer basis, or they're going to have to recruit for a general manager who has experience, and they then have to allow that within their wages going forward. So if you're an owner, and look, this is communal garden stuff, and your accountant will be telling you this every time they see you, delegate and try to ensure that the work that you do in the business, whilst it's important work, is not rocket science, and it can be done by people with a reasonable business head on their shoulders. And that's really the key to it. And that's pretty much us, I think, Sam.
It's the old
mistakes.
Personal goodwill versus business goodwill. One has a value and one doesn't, and we'll actually discuss that in another episode down the line. But you did right. That concludes us. We shall see you next episode.